Good afternoon. Welcome to the Sativa Segment with me, Richard Cheng, as your host. We are recording episode 30. Yes, the big 3-0. After 2.5 years, we finally made the 3-0 mark. But before we get started, I'd like to say that this episode is fueled by Ritter Spencer Cheng. It's a local one-stop business law firm. It's located in Addison, Texas. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, go to ritterspencercheng.com. Today, I have two industry colleagues with me. They're both family law attorneys. I've never had family law attorneys with me, but we're going to talk about some very interesting family law issues involving cannabis. So welcome, Jeff Doman and Mary Neal.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, I know. Of course, we kind of run into each other from time to time at different conferences. I ran into both of you at I want to say some spring conference that I spoke at, and I think Mary, you helped me get on speaking panels. But it's always nice to have you guys as guests. So you ready to talk about some family law issues or what?
Daily.
Yeah. I mean, it's not every day that we talk about family law issues, and people who are listening, they're probably thinking, well, gosh, Richard's really gone off the deep end. Why is he talking about cannabis when it involves family law issues? But we'll get to that. Let's get to know you as a person first. Okay. Why don't we start with Mary? Mary, tell me a little bit about like how you got into family law, where you're from, what you encounter on a day-to-day basis with your practice.
Sure. Mary Neal. So I'm born and raised Texan. I'm actually a 6th-generation Texan.
Oh, wow.
Grew up here in the Dallas area, specifically Garland is where I grew up, and I went to Garland High School. I originally went to University of Texas to be a journalism major. I wanted to be a photographer.
Okay.
But because of the type of education we had to do a media law class. And so when I did that, I learned about the First Amendment, fell in love, decided to go to law school. And I interestingly did go to law school wanting to do family law. But when I graduated, the first job I got was not family law.
Now, is that common for people to say, I want to go to law school and want to do family law? Because it wasn't the case for me.
No.
Okay.
No.
So people, is it safe to say that people just kind of fall into it?
I think so. I think I met one other person at my law school that was interested in doing family law.
Okay.
And I feel pretty confident that that person is not doing family law.
Okay.
But yeah, so I left and I was doing civil litigation type stuff.
Okay.
And I actually wanted to be in court more often. And so I left and went into family law from there. And so I've been doing family law now for 11 years.
Okay.
For the most part, I just opened up my own law firm, Mary Neal Family Law, last year, June of 2024.
Yeah.
I have kind of found a niche in doing a lot of high conflict child custody is what I tend to do on a more regular basis, but we do divorces, prenups, postnups. I'm often working with Jeff's law firm in various ways of prenups, postnups. We work really well together. So,
okay. Well, you know what they say, regardless what the economy is like, people always continue to get married and divorced.
And have kids.
And have kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was in law school, we, and at least in our law school, you were required to take 2 of the 3 classes. And those 3 were wills and estates, criminal procedure, and family law. And because for whatever reason, the schedule didn't work out. I chose not to do family law originally, but then my advisor in law school, what happened to be the family law guru, she wrote a book for a statutory book for the state of Florida. And she came to me really pretty angry at me, Richard, how can you do this to me? I was expecting you in my class. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm taking family law. So looking back, I'm actually really glad I did because even though I don't practice in family law, I hear about stories and I'm able to at least, point people in the right direction. So very interesting practice.
And I think my experience was quite different from Mary's.
Okay.
I was one of those guys in law school that said, I'll do anything except family law. And it's crazy how I ended up here. But like you said, I don't think people go to law school and want to be a family law lawyer. I think that's kind of the red-headed stepchild of the practice of law. And from my perspective, I got questions all the time. Why in the world would you want to do family law? And I'll tell you what's interesting. The one thing I love about family law that makes it different from any other area of the law that is out there is I believe I get to create my own facts. And my client gets to create their own facts before they get to trial. So if you take the example of a criminal law lawyer, they have their office, they get a call from a client. The client says, hey, I was out late last night. I drank too much. I drove my car and I got in a car accident and, caused all kinds of damage. Can you help me? Well, that lawyer is stuck with the facts that they've been presented with. And what makes family law so awesome is I might get a phone call from somebody and they might say, hey, I really screwed up. I got really drunk or I did something and I got my kids taken away from me.
Yeah.
What I get to do is I get to get in with that individual and work with them to help them change either the direction of their life or their direction of where this lawsuit is going to go. And I can help them because a lot of times the judges don't focus on what happened in the past. They focus on what's going on right now. And so if you've had trouble with drinking or addiction or all kinds of issues, you can a lot of times work to change those facts to make them work out better for you in the end. So for me, that became a reason that I really felt like I could have an impact on people and make a difference.
And you know what else is interesting, I find is, and again, I'm not a family law practitioner. I do, healthcare regulatory M&A work, but it seems like to me, like judges and courts, there's a lot of anticipatory what would happen in the future, particularly with child custody or the welfare of a child. If a child is in possession of this parent over this parent, this could happen, or there's a high risk areas of this happening to the child. Is that the case, or is that an area where it can be kind of challenging?
Well, I think it'd be challenging, but the good thing is you always get an opportunity, if the right situation presents itself, to come back and change things in the future. Because things do change.
Yeah.
And so we might have a setup where mom has primary custody of the kids and dad, has a possession schedule, or what we call the standard possession schedule. And as kids get older and things change, then you can always go back and adjust that. And I think that gives the opportunity of flexibility. And so the court can change and move with the situation that's in front of them, and specifically as it deals with the child.
Yeah. And I think what I always tell clients, and I'm always saying, is that family law and our court system in general tends to be very reactive. We are not proactive. So we are in orders because something happened. And we are trying to, kind of like what Jeff was saying, we were trying to navigate you back out of what potentially might have been the bad thing that occurred. But then the countersuit of that is that the people who are just so high anxiety about the separation, and now their children are going to have to go be with this person that they're divorcing, separating for whatever reason, they are thinking, well, why can't we put in X, Y, and Z? Why can't we put in all of these various orders to protect my child from that thing happening? And we just don't do that. We're reactive, not proactive. But
I guess is that just kind of the nature of the beast, or do you think as a whole people can be more proactive?
I think based on past experiences, I think this is one way that Jeff and I are going to be really good at these kinds of things, is that your attorney, the more experienced your attorney is in these worlds, they can be a lot more proactive and think through, okay, well, we've seen this kind of stuff before, so what can we make sure our clients have in there? But for the most part, it really is just, okay, well, this thing happened, so how can we get out of this scenario and back into a world where these kids are being taken care of. Yeah.
Now, how long have you been practicing, Jeff, in this area?
Well, I've been practicing since November of 2000. So I'm almost at the 25-year mark, which is crazy. But I'll tell you, family law is one of those things that it's always an adventure. You're always addressing new issues. You're always addressing different issues. And I still feel challenged on a daily and weekly and monthly basis with the issues that we're dealing with. And one of those has to do with the whole thing with marijuana that we're here to talk about today.
Yeah.
Because I promise you, the world that I was addressing as a family law lawyer when I first got started, and the perception of how judges viewed marijuana back in the early 2000s compared to how they view it now is vastly different. And I would tell you that back in the early 2000s, I'd say 90% of the judges were anti-marijuana. And maybe 10% were open to this idea of maybe it's not as bad as the other drugs.
Okay.
And I would estimate, I don't have any research to prove this, but I would think that pendulum has definitely shifted. And maybe not all the way over to where 90% of judges are okay with it and 10% are not.
Right.
But I think we're getting there.
Okay.
And it's really interesting to see how great of a shift has occurred in that area alone.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll work our way there. But I actually do have a couple other just out of curiosity, because you've been practicing for 25 years, and as you say, you're always facing with something new. And Mary, you've been practicing for 11 years. I'm sure you've seen the industry change. I guess my question is, how have you seen, other than what the perceptions of cannabis through the eyes of a judge, how else have you seen the industry or family law practice change over time? And I'm thinking about one thing in particular. I know the Texas Family Code is supposed to be gender neutral. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Do you feel that it's applied gender neutral today compared to what it was before, or vice versa?
I can't speak for all of Texas.
Yeah.
But I will say in the DFW area where Mary and I both practice, I think we have really good judges.
Okay.
And I think our judges really do apply the law. And I think you're right. The law is gender neutral. And I think 25 years ago, there was definitely a bias to where moms get primary custody and dads get what we call the standard possession schedule. And I think that has changed. And I think men and women walk into the courtroom nowadays with both having an equal opportunity to be as active and involved in their kids' lives as they want to do. Now, I will tell you, there's definitely a push to people who have held a primary responsibility for the children in the past. And take, for example, the example of you have a spouse that goes to work every day and you have a spouse that stays home and takes care of the kids. Well, the judge are going to look at that irrespective of whether the working spouse is male or female and whether or not the stay-at-home spouse is male or female. That's going to make a bigger impact as opposed to the gender of the parent.
Yeah, and I'm sure technology has changed some of that too, right? In the sense that people are working from home more and more. So the days of the dad putting on his clothes, saying goodbye to the family, and off to the office he goes, and he comes home, 5:30, 6. Those days have changed a lot for a lot of professionals or a lot of workers, right? It doesn't have to be professionals. So would you say that has an impact at all?
I think I thought it was going to have a lot more impact than I think I'm actually seeing it, because in the days of COVID, we were seeing the parents who were now all of a sudden working from home, having to figure out, just like anyone else, whether they were going through divorce, child custody or not, having to figure out, how do I manage working and also taking care of the children, because we can't do these things. But now it's become a little bit more normalized to send the kids back to daycare, to send them to school, all that kind of thing while working from home. I personally see working from home as just an extension of the office. So I see a lot of parents, I don't know if Jeff sees this too, but I see a lot of parents who they're working from home. So they're getting maybe 2 extra hours with their kids because they're not in traffic. But in the grand scheme of things, they're at work during those business hours. So it really hasn't changed that much. Now that the kids are able to go back to daycare, school, that stuff.
Okay. That's a fair statement. So let's circle back to a little bit what Jeff was talking about the perceptions of cannabis overall. You said 25 years ago, the perception of what cannabis really is and how it works was very different than what it is now. What kind of issues are you seeing today involving cannabis as it crosses over into your world with family law? And of course, that conversation will lead to really how the three of us, really me and Mary individually, you and I worked on some stuff together.
I'll tell you, I heard a judge once say something that about made me fall out of my chair.
Okay. What's that?
And the judge said, I don't care if somebody's using marijuana. I thought, really?
What was this?
It was at a conference. but it was a local judge.
Okay. Was it in the last 10 years?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It was within the last 10 years. And I will tell you, I started to think about that. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought this makes sense. And let me give you an example as to why that is.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people out there that exercise because it's really good for them,
Yep.
right? And just like anything else, you can take something that's good for you and do it to the point to where it becomes problematic. So let's take somebody who's really into fitness and they run marathons. And if they want to go train for a marathon and run marathons and they're always out running marathons and training, well, how does that look from the perspective of a little kid, right?
Yeah.
That little kid doesn't understand that dad is out working on his body and trying to be healthy.
Yeah.
That little kid's perspective is, my dad's never here. He's always gone, right? And I believe marijuana can be viewed as the same way, to where if you're using marijuana, but you can still be active and present and engaged with your kids and do what you need to do, a lot of judges will overlook that. And judges will think, hey, they might be using marijuana, but I'm not seeing a negative reaction or a negative impact on the children. So why am I going to punish somebody who's a really good parent but makes the choice to use marijuana? And so if you look at it that way, I think it changes the perspective, because everything we do as lawyers, Mary, who tries a lot of cases related to child custody, and me, whatever you do can be looked at as positive or negative based on how it impacts the kids.
Has marijuana use ever been compared in the courts? Just curious, to say alcohol. So let me give you a scenario. A dad or a mom, they're not alcoholic. They have healthy kids, right? They're involved, they're engaging, but they do have one or two drinks a day. They come home from work, they have a glass of wine. They have maybe 2 glasses of wine. Has that ever been compared to a parent coming home and having a joint?
I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to take it. It's not just drinking. It's marijuana. It's smoking. It's gambling. It's porn. All these things that there's an argument of, hey, well, that's legal. Pornography is legal in the United States. Smoking is legal in the United States. Drinking is legal in the United States. But we have an issue of, how does your doing something that is legal impact the kids? And I believe it's the same test that judges run this through. Is the action that you're doing, whether legal or maybe questionable to some people, does it have an impact on how you parent your kids? And I think that's what our judges are smart enough to focus on and determine if it's problematic or if it's not.
I think we've benefited from 2 things that have occurred. One is the legalization in other states. So what we were starting to see, I think, first was someone would go to Colorado, someone would go to California, someone would go somewhere, partake legally in what they were doing there, come back and then test positive here in Texas. And so then now the judges are having to kind of comprehend, well, he tested positive, she tested positive. What am I going to do with that? Normally, once upon a time, it would have been just a straight up, well, now you're supervised, or now you're going to have restricted access, something like that. But now we have this legal argument of she was doing that perfectly legal. Why are we saying anything? And so now the judges are having to think about it that way. Secondly, we also had some Supreme Court cases come down in our CPS cases that decided that finally, just because you are doing drugs doesn't necessarily mean that you should have your rights terminated. And so the Supreme Court decided the courts have to take
Texas Supreme Court.
Texas Supreme Court came back and said, you have to do that extra analysis of, is the drug use impairing their ability to parent so severely that their rights should be terminated? What
constitutes an impairment of a
man?
That's where litigation comes in. Did I ask the wrong question?
To lawyers who litigate, it depends. It's our favorite. It's our favorite phrase.
Hey, listen, I'm a lawyer too. I gotta ask, what constitutes an impairment, right? I mean, to what degree too?
Right.
Okay, so you have these new issues that come up, like cannabis, right? You have these. How are people like yourselves learning about it? How are you educating yourselves about it? Because you do have these new burgeoning issues that, Jeff, quite frankly, 25 years ago when you first got started, you weren't really facing on a regular basis. How are family law attorneys getting, or even judges getting education on all this?
Well, I'll tell you, I go to a lot of continuing legal education seminars.
Yep.
And sometimes you go to those legal education seminars and you check your emails and you're drafting orders and you're talking with your friends. But sometimes you go to continuing legal education seminars and it's really good. And I remember going to the Collin County Bar Association meeting several years ago when you spoke.
Oh,
and
thanks.
you spoke on this topic.
Okay.
And it was captivating because of the whole dichotomy of the federal system and the state system, and some states having it legal and some states having it illegal, and certain types of marijuana being legal versus illegal. And it was mind-blowing to me. And I remember thinking, this is a topic that is going to be really big and have a major impact on my business. And so I remember thinking, I don't know all this stuff, but I know who does. And when I have an issue like that comes up, I'm going to give Richard a call and I'm going to have him help me on that.
Thank you.
And so I specifically remember learning a lot about the marijuana and cannabis issue from you at a legal education seminar, and it was wonderful.
Okay, I appreciate that. But are you having our family? I know there's an annual family law retreat or a conference you guys have, maybe in the Hill Country every year or something like that.
We would definitely not call it a retreat, but yeah.
Okay, well, whatever. But I mean, are you seeing more of these classes being taught, or are you seeing judges having more questions? Are you seeing education committees saying, maybe we should have a session on alternative substances or on cannabis? Because quite frankly, if you really want to get technical, you have your state-sponsored medical cannabis programs, but then you have this entire consumable hemp program here in Texas that is licensed and regulated by DSHS. That is a completely different beast, but yet the same, because they both have THC, which is psychoreactive, which could impair the parent, or have an effect on the parent, which could lead to a litigation matter. Are you seeing more of your family law colleagues looking into that?
I don't know that I'm necessarily seeing it more at our conferences for the education. To piggyback on what he's learning in education, I've always learned best by going to colleagues. And that's actually how I learned of you, I did not go to the CCBA meeting, so I was unaware of this. But I had an issue come up, and so I just started reaching out to friends, colleagues in the community, asking who had dealt with it. And so that's where a lot of my learning came from, was you just kind of go out and ask, who's dealt with this before? And what do you know? And where do I need to go learn more about it? And so at the time, fortunately, I had another partner at the law firm that I was working at who had someone who had been licensed and had the license here in Texas to be able to, or the prescription to be able to get it here in Texas. And then that led me to, someone just came to Collin County Bar Association to speak about it.
And you found my name through your former firm?
Correct, yes.
A colleague?
Correct,
You know what's funny about that? My mother of my two kids, who I get along with fine now, she used to use your firm. Well, your former firm. Yeah. So that's a small world. But there's a reason why I'm asking all this. The reason I'm asking all this is because I do see, because I working in an industry that I do come across individuals in the industry, and because they do regularly consume, because they come across products, whether it's through teacup or through stuff that they buy at a vape shop, they are concerned parents, right? So my thinking is, if family law attorneys and if judges are not up to speed on some of these issues, they may not be very effective advocates in certain pockets of these issues, right? And so if they're not very effective advocates, then what are really the options for individuals who are going through a tumultuous time, through a divorce, through a child custody issue? How do they get effective counsel, right? And so that's really why I was asking about that.
Well, and I'll tell you, I think, and whether this is right or wrong, I think marijuana just gets lumped in the pile of addictions, right? And so we have a lot of seminars or speakers that'll talk about drug testing, or they'll talk about addiction and issues related to addiction, and they seem to throw in alcohol and marijuana and drug use and all these things in together as one. And you might get 3 or 4 minutes that addresses the marijuana specific issue. And so to go back to your question, Richard, we don't know everything there is to know about marijuana.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, judges don't know everything about marijuana.
Yeah.
Because although Mary and I both specialize in family law,
Yeah.
that's all we do.
Right.
We go in front of judges that are doing family law and corporate law and estate planning and business litigation.
Yeah.
They're doing everything, and they can't know everything about family law, and they can't know everything about the marijuana issues. And so that's where the judges depend on the lawyers to educate them on the issues.
Yeah.
And if a judge is looking at me to educate them on marijuana issues, I'm going to tell them I am wholly inadequate to educate you to a point to where you need to understand these things. And like Mary and I both say, that's when we bring you in, because you now become the expert. You can answer all the little questions and the big questions and give a full picture understanding to the judge and teach it in such a way that the judge is going to say, okay, now I feel comfortable with how I need to rule because I've heard from an expert who understands everything about the marijuana issue.
Okay, that makes sense. I like to transition to the cases to the extent that you can talk about the case, and we'll be very careful on names, and stuff like that. But we'll start off with Mary first, because Mary, you were the first one to come to me. This is maybe 3 years ago now.
Sounds all right.
Two and a half years.
Yeah.
About 2.5 years, and you were still at your former firm. I remember getting you reached out to me, and I think you have an assistant. Is it her name's Melanie or something?
Yes.
Yeah. Melanie emailed me and CC'd you, and our case that we worked on together involved a client, and this client is registered with the Texas Compassionate Use Program.
Yes.
Or TCUP. And this client consumes
Correct.
on a pretty regular basis for one of the qualifying conditions that this person qualifies for.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the background and I guess really how some of the issues that you were challenged with within the court by the judge. And this is in Denton County, just to be clear.
Yes, this was a Denton County case. It started based on not drug-related issues whatsoever. There were some concerns about some physical abuse.
Okay.
And there was my client was looking to flip who was the primary parent situation because of these allegations of the possible physical abuse going on. And so once it became pretty clear that is exactly what was happening and the kids were out crying and things like that, that is when the other parent started pointing to the marijuana usage to try.
I'm bad. I might beat somebody up, but at least I'm not using drugs,
Correct.
right? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Let's throw as much mud on the wall as possible.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, wait a minute. She just said domestic abuse.
Yeah.
So this person who took part in domestic abuse is pointing fingers at the person who is using a state-sponsored, legal, medical cannabis program.
Yes.
And calling this person a pothead, et cetera, et cetera.
Pretty much,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
And so in the initial hering,
Kind of funny if you think about it.
in the initial hearing, I was unaware of the marijuana usage because it, in my opinion, was not relevant. So I hadn't really learned enough about it. So I was unaware that she was in the registered program. And so it was just getting brought up, and my client kind of kept underlying issues just kind of prevented their ability to really tell me what was going on. And so the court actually called CPS into the courtroom and demanded they do now further investigation into my client to figure out what was going on with the marijuana usage. Fortunately, the person that was doing the investigation in that saw the registration in the program and very quickly told the court there's really no problem there. But that did not stop the other parent from continuing. So we had multiple more hearings where the other parent kept trying to become more and more restrictive on what my client could or could not do underneath the registration program. And so ultimately what ultimately got me to call you was because we went into a hearing, and no matter how much I tried to educate the judge on the program, the judge ultimately decided that no marijuana usage was going to be allowed whatsoever, no matter how much we were trying to stress this was really important.
And what was this judge's reasoning?
I don't think he ever really gave one, but it came across very much that he didn't understand the legality of it. And so in his brain, marijuana is illegal. No one should be using it. You can Google it and see. I'm just saying, right? You can Google it and see that DPS oversees it. Yeah. Okay. And so when I realized that it seemed like it came from a point of this judge really needed to be educated, I think I left the courtroom, and then the next day was looking for you.
Got it. Okay. So ultimately, did this client of yours, did this person ever have access taken away?
No.
Okay. So this person was still able to continue using the products because this person was registered with Teacup. Legally.
Under the program, my client would have been able to. But under the court order, they were not allowed to consume anything.
Yeah, so that's what I'm asking. So the court order did get issued to prevent your client from accessing Teacup, even though she was registered with Teacup.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Okay.
And more importantly, the court order was issued preventing my client from accessing health care, because that is what was happening. And so and that's where it was very important to bring someone on who could educate the judge.
Yeah. So if you really think about it, right, your client had a qualifying condition, whatever that qualifying condition was, I forget. To prevent somebody from accessing medical cannabis that's a state-sponsored program like Teacup is essentially, it's very analogous to say, you can't have those pills from the pharmacy anymore that you regularly use to address your symptoms. I mean, I think it's a fair comparison.
Right.
I think you're getting a lot of pushback on that with judges, though. And I think you have to look at it from where that judge is coming from. Okay. And I think we as family law lawyers, I don't know if you're the same way about this, Mary, but I think everybody pretty much goes through divorces, right? Because that's all I do on a daily basis. Yep. Our judges who hear our divorce cases also hear alcohol cases and they hear drug cases all day long. And they have client after client after client coming in front of them pleading guilty to all these different things related to alcohol offenses and drug offenses. And one of my friends is a judge, and he'll talk to these people and he'll say, tell me, how'd you get here today? What were your dreams when you were in high school? What were your dreams when you were in college? When did you start using? You know, and they might be up in front on a cocaine or a meth charge. And what my judge friend will tell me is they all start the same way. They all start with marijuana, or that's what he says. And so from the perspective of a judge, you have, going back to what Mary said about they're not proactive, they're reactive. And so if you have judges that hear this over and over and over again, their mindset is, well, marijuana leads to other things. And that's why it's important for us, using you in the situation, to help reshift the thinking of the judge. Because if you just go in right away and say, hey, marijuana, it's legal, or I have Teacup and, you know, it's all going to be okay, you're going to get judges that bristle. And so you got to educate them and help them understand why this is different. And I think that's the way you're going to have success with judges. Otherwise, you're going to be beating your head up against the wall with the judge that doesn't want to hear because they have some preconceived notions, or maybe they just had a hearing earlier in the day that was problematic and it had these same issues.
You know what's interesting about this topic and about just cannabis as a healthcare issue? I actually had an earlier session, and we were talking about the endocannabinoid system, which is within your body. And in fact, most people aren't even that aware of the fact that every single person has an endocannabinoid system.
You can add me to that list. Yeah. That word is not a word I've ever heard before.
Yeah. So there's about almost 200, cannabinoids in any given plant. And how how the endocannabinoid system works is when you have a molecule like a CBD or CBG, CBN, they have a lock and key system to where it floats in your body and they lock and key into your endocannabinoid system, therefore creating this effect that's tied into your nervous system, that's tied to your lymphatic system, that's tied to your cardiovascular system. It's all connected. And if you talk to any physician, and I have a few physician friends, some of which graduated 20 plus years ago, some of which graduated in the last 2 years. If you ask any of them, they will tell you the same thing. They spend probably no more than 30 minutes in 4 years of med school learning about the endocannabinoid system. And which is scary because as lawyers, I've been being in this industry for almost 12 years now, or actually right at 12 years. I've probably had more education than the average physician on the endocannabinoid system because of the continuing education courses that I've been to. And where I'm getting at is, I think if judges and advocates understand that there's this entire human physiology play that's interconnected with why a client like Mary's is taking the products that this person is taking, not just to get high, not just a gateway drug, but there is this entire impact on the endocannabinoid system and how a person responds. I think it could be very persuasive in the courtroom, in my opinion, So of course, our case never really came to fruition all the way, partly because of this man.
Correct.
So
didn't need to educate the judge anymore.
Yeah, you didn't need to educate the judge because shortly thereafter, I got a call from Mr. Doman right here. And ironically, this is before the same court. And the judge in that case, Jeff, why don't you remind me a little bit about our case together that we worked on?
Sure. I had a client who came in and talked to me about an issue they were having where their spouse was attempting to restrict their time with the kids. And it was a pretty hefty restriction. Opposing counsel had run down to the courthouse on an emergency and said, we need to keep this mom from having any access and possession of her kids. So I got involved to try and help. And, it's not uncommon for lawyers to jump on a situation that has happened and try and use a situation to get as much of an advanced lead on the other as possible. And this was one of those situations where I felt like we were in a 100-yard dash and we were starting at the start line and the other side was already on the 20-yard line. And I got hired. And in addition to dealing with the initial issue of why the judge decided it was appropriate to take away the kids from mom, we got hit with another issue, and that was a positive drug test.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the struggle for me, as I talked to my client, was her response was, Jeff, I bought this at the local store. I walked it. Wasn't even related to teacup. It wasn't a medical issue. It's just I went to the store and bought this, and I kicked positive for it. Now, of course, my mind, I'm a cynic, right? I don't necessarily believe anything anybody tells me. I want to see proof. So I went and bought it myself. I went to a smoke shop. It's called Stinky's. It's out on 77. And I bought the product. And right there, you can read what's in it. And I talked to you about it. And you said, yeah, you take that product, you're going to kick positive on a drug test.
Yeah.
And I thought, to me, that doesn't make sense. How is it that we can use a positive drug test against somebody as an additional barrier to them having time with their kids if anybody can go down to the local store and buy it? And so that's where I got you involved. And you helped me understand that although this is a legal issue or this is something you can buy over the counter, the drug testing agencies don't have an ability to differentiate what is legally purchased and what is illegally purchased. And I still don't know if I understand that. I'm going to defer to you on that one. But you were absolutely marvelous in helping me understand the issue so I could address it with the court and make sure the court understood it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Is that delta 9 THC is delta 9 THC, delta 8 THC is delta 8 THC, whether it's hemp derived or if it's the guy in the alley that's selling it out of his van, or if it's through teacup, right? I mean, the lab that picks it up, they're not going to be able to differentiate that. So that's absolutely true. But our journey continues. You got me designated as an expert.
I did.
And I actually went down to the court with you. I sat in the back, ready to testify. Got my chops all ready to go. I never got there. Tell me about what you did, or what your approach was, or your strategy was, because you certainly made my life a lot easier. Although I actually was looking very much forward to testifying. But what was your approach with your client?
To me, the approach with the client was understanding the issue. And like I said earlier, I don't know everything about every area of the law, but where I do think I'm deficient, I have the ability to go jump in and get people to help me, whether that's by hiring a CPA for a complex property issue, or bringing in a parenting coach, or bringing in somebody like you to help understand the marijuana or the cannabis issue. And so for me, I gave my client the option to bring you in to help educate me, so then I could then go and sound smart when I talk to the judge about it. And I truly believe our judges care so much about the cases that we bring to them. They want to get it right. And so my job is to educate them so that they know what's out there to help them make the best answer possible. Like Mary was talking about earlier, she had the client just wanted to throw stuff on the other side, and the other side is throwing stuff back. Well, that doesn't help the judge. The judge doesn't want to hear or referee everybody going back and forth. They're looking for solutions. And so I think one thing that you were able to help us do was come up with a solution. Hey, judge, this is legal. There is a difference between what's legal and what's illegal, and what she did is legal. And so she shouldn't have this as a barrier to her getting back and having possession with her kids. And so your educating me allowed me to educate the judge, and it ended up working really well for my client.
Good. And honestly, as a spectator sitting in the back, essentially eating his virtual popcorn, I could tell the judge genuinely did care. I think the judge asked the right questions. I think you did an excellent job of explaining some of his questions, but you can tell in his tone of voice and the type of questions he was asking, he genuinely did care. Which of course took the thunder out of Mary's case, because now the judge is all up to speed on everything. So, but nevertheless, it was a interesting run with you. It was definitely an interesting run with your case, Jeff. Similar issues, same court, and I would say, let's take it one court at a time, right? Because I'm certain, given the number of courts out there in the small towns, big cities, whatever, out of all the courts that's hearing family law cases dealing with this very particular issue, there are about 1,000 other judges just like that judge, right? And so, I think you guys are doing excellent work in this area.
Oh, and I would take it one further. It's not just the judges that need the education. I'm still dealing with issues with drug testing facilities. So there are some drug testing facilities in the Dallas area that if you show up and prove to them that you are a registered patient under the teacup, they will not change the positive to a negative. So under normal circumstances, you show up, you take a drug test, you tell them up front, hey, I have an Adderall prescription. You prove that you have an Adderall prescription. So then when you test positive for amphetamines, they then change the positive to a negative. So you can take a negative test because you have it legally, right? There are some drug testing facilities that despite you proving you're part of the teacup, they will not change that marijuana from positive to negative. Some will.
That is very interesting. And I think that goes back to the pushback. It's the same pushback you're going to get from judges. It's not just the judges, it's the testing facilities that are given pushback on that.
And do you ever see like testing facilities where like you get one test? So for example, in Jeff's case, one side was ordering a test, right? Can you have a second test to challenge that test or to verify the accuracy of that test? And then it becomes a battle of the experts. benefits, right?
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
okay, so you can have that. All right. So as we wrap up, I want you to, in summary, in maybe say 30 seconds to a minute, give me the most gruesome, like crazy story that you've ever handled.
That's so awesome.
Go.
You get to go first.
Yeah, deer in headlights right now.
I love it. See, I'm getting to put a fellow attorney on the stand, and she's the deer in headlights.
Yeah, I guess when you say gruesome,
Well, I mean,
because unfortunately, we deal with abuse.
Something very vivid that kind of sticks out in your head. And the reason I use gruesome is because, and I'll tell you the real reason why. Because I personally went through some personal issues myself with 5.5 years of litigation with my 2 kids' mom. But as we were winding that up, and one time I had a very brief discussion with her. I'm like, we don't always see eye to eye. We have we've bickered, but whatever our issues are, it was over extracurricular activities. It's not the kid that's getting that's being tortured, or the mom leaving some kid on, in an abandoned warehouse or whatever. Our issues become suddenly, if you really reflect on it, it's like, man, my issues are really mild compared to what real people are dealing with, real issues out there.
Yeah.
So you start kind of appreciating your own life a little bit more.
So the one that made me go to counseling and have to have multiple massages because it locked up my entire body because it was so stressful.
Okay.
Was we had a termination case in Collin County where we represented the dad. And we were trying to terminate mom's rights in a private. So CPS was not involved. This was all private termination. And we had a recording that was played to the jury where this child was screaming in the background because it was a phone call between dad and mom had the child, and the child was screaming in the background, "Don't kill me, mom, don't kill me," over and over again. And then that child came and testified in court. And the first question of her attorney, the amicus attorney, asked the child, can you explain to the court about the time that your mom tried to kill you? And her response was that the first or the second time you're asking me? Like, this woman had tried to kill her child twice. And
how old was the child?
At the time that she was testifying, she was 14.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. So
that's really sad.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, do you have something that can?
Well, I'm gonna try and leave it on a more positive.
Yeah, I was gonna say, maybe
add a little bit of sunshine to this story.
Give us a good story instead.
Never ask for a gruesome story from a family lawyer.
That's right. It's funny. I had a client that came to me once, and they were referred by another family law lawyer.
Okay.
And our client had kicked positive for cocaine, and she had lost primary custody of her kids to her ex. And they came to me and said, we're set for trial. We need help. And this kind of goes back to what I was referencing earlier about you're not stuck with the facts that are brought into you when you first meet with a client. You have the opportunity to change the course of someone's life and the direction and their future. And I took this client on, and we started prepping for trial and coming up with a game plan of, I made a mistake. It was the biggest mistake in my life. You, judge, have helped me see that by taking away what was most important to me, my kids, because of my poor choice. And we ended up taking this to trial. And at the end of trial, my client got her kids back. And it was absolutely wonderful. It was an amazing moment. But that moment pales in comparison to what happened after that. I remember I was working on New Year's Eve about 2 months later at the end of the year. And my client had her kids with her for the Christmas break. And I got a call from the front desk and said, hey, Jeff, there's somebody up here to see you. And so as I walked towards the front desk, I opened up the door, and my client, who I got custody back for her and her kids, she said, that's him right there. And they ran to me and gave me a hug, and they gave me my Christmas gift. And I thought, that's why I do this.
Yeah.
Because
it's so
the
rewarding,
impact
right?
you can have on people and their children and their lives can't be measured. And I'm not going to say it balances out all the really difficult cases that we have to deal with, but it's that little bit of sunshine that says, you know what? Doing this is worth it. And so glad we're able to help people in that regard.
Absolutely.
That's definitely the high note. Yours was like, you brought me down.
Again, don't ask for a gruesome story.
Well, hey, thank you both for making the time to come down here and to talk about the stories that we shared. And I'm really glad that you guys had a chance to come to the podcast and help me create episode 30.
Thank you so much.
I think it's a very valuable episode. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All
Richard.
right, thanks.
Appreciate it.